moment I've been at one of the meetings and on the retreat last semester, and I know it has helped me and every other man who's attended. This came to me 2 years after Rob first came into contact with the group, didn't attend much. They came to me privately, but I knew from others that during one of the semester's last gatherings he had made an impassioned plea that the group continue meetings in the fall. So he turned out to be one of the greatest boosters of the group, though at the beginning he had really serious doubts. I saw him at graduation last month and offered that we meet during the summer and talk more about things. I have an office on campus where I usually meet students, but in New York City there are a number of little cafes that have been around there for years and years, and so I often meet 2 students, 3 students, sometimes 1 student for coffee, and these things are initiated always by them. We meet up. I'm pretty sure I'll have a chance to see how Rob's doing as he sets out, having just graduated. This is part of, I think, the ongoing mentoring idea that we want to think about and find ways of implementing. By the way, when I say are for boys, I always mean the experience of a given boy or man. So I'm moving on now to another point. Young males don't die at their own hand, go to prison, or fail to earn a high school diploma. A certain boy commits suicide. A certain boy with a name is incarcerated or drops out of school. A certain boy is clinically depressed or acts out and is treated with Ritalin. He has a name and his experience is unique. While we will speak about most boys just as we speak about most men, and not that very small group who have gained and retained power that I mentioned before, we must realize that there are only one-of-a-kind individual young males, each of whose situation is unique. Obviously, then, you've guessed that my next recommendation must be that we always think in terms of individual boys, and first do what we can on a small scale, one-to-one, even as we work to bring to public attention how things stand for most boys, which is one of the goals of the work of this group. A further recommendation about what to do next has to do with getting at the experience of quiet boys and young, verbally less proficient young men. This will amount to finding settings and situations in which to engage them and transmit to them nothing more than that we value them. My colleague, South African-born professor of English, Dennis Gowes at Springfield College in New England, in the New England part of the States, calls this simply male-positive interaction. We will be busy finding the best practices and settings for such interactions. The traditionally likely venues, schools, and the playing fields may no longer be the best places for this. Next, I recommend that we speak openly about what is good about being male, and point out where descriptions, especially of young males' behavior, have been skewed, and in the process, most males, especially young males, skewered by accounts of them that they react to quite rightly by saying mostly to themselves, who are they talking about? Many, when they see themselves misrepresented in the media and even purportedly scholarly publications, turn away in disgust, as they should. We have to correct the profiles that some pundits continue to promulgate. Media propaganda is a powerful social force. When it's male denigrating, male bashing, it harms everyone, men, women, parents, families, and I think the construction of social reality. Let me give you an illustration of this. During freshman orientation week at nearly every American college and university, attendance is required of all incoming students at sessions billed as consciousness-raising sessions on date rape. The boys, who are about 18 years old and have not yet had an academic class, are shamed in these situations by the suggestion that they harbor tendencies to harm the girls sitting next to them. I'm happy to say that in my 18 years, I know at Wagner, I know of only one confirmed incident of reported male-on-female date rape. The question comes, why has this seminar been required? Well, we enroll 2,000 students each year, and out of that number, the occasions that I've mentioned are negligible. More important, the girls and boys there tell me it rarely happens, and I believe them. The girls tell me it, and the guys tell me it. It is not a matter of underreporting. The boys are enjoying their sexuality in an environment in which they can experiment with it, and so are the girls, and more and more so. They take responsibility for their behavior and assume rightly that the boys will too. Speaking of the girls there. And by the way, they refer to each other as boys and girls, and so I follow their lead in this. 22-year-olds, and I say, now, well, the women in the class, and then, well, the girls. I say, the men in the class, and they say they're boys. Freshman seminars, for example, on males as sexual predators suggest something that has nothing to do with most males. Instead, we must remind an incoming class about what young men and young women do well. And this needs to extend beyond college to what media representations of what most boys, blokes, do. Next, I would recommend that we recall something unique about young boys, and as far as I can tell, adult males too. This is quite specific. Boys usually prefer doing to saying. A small boy is not likely to say to his mom, to turn to his mom and say, I love you, I really do, let me count the ways. Here's the first, and then the second, and the third. Instead, he brings her a small snake he has captured in the grass in exchange for her having washed his tennis shoes. Or he makes a box for Dad to put a snake in, hands it to him, and watches as Dad captures one. Does he need to be told he is loved? He does, by both parents. As I noted this morning, one will be unconditional, the other conditional. And this is the unconditional love of the mother that teaches him that he's lovable, and it's the conditional love of the father that's based on his having initiated a relationship with his dad. I think this is really important. So I recommend that we tell boys that we love them. Not be embarrassed to use those words. Now, don't expect a verbal response or even a sign that they have heard what you've said. This becomes even more problematic after puberty, when a lad may say to his mom, stop talking that way, that's gross. And I think Celia gave an example of mother-pubescent son closeness. Don't expect that the mom has to know when she tells him that she still loves him, even though he's damaged the fender of the family automobile. I also recommend that we recall something else that is good about boys, and again, perhaps men at their best, and that is that they do not always take the world too seriously. Can this be a good thing? I think so. Boys are playful. To borrow an old word, ludic, playful, tricksters, humorists. They do not take sex as seriously as women do. Life for men is a comedy in the classic sense. You recall the U-shape of the comedic mask. Things start off at a high point, descend into a difficult time, but return to a high point. This is the life of the trickster, the boy, but also the hero. What else is positive about males, especially young males, that we can recall? It's clear from world religions and mythology that men fully appreciate the connection between the divine, the numinous, and reproduction. What I said before about men taking the consequences of sexuality less seriously needs to be balanced by this consideration, that as procreators, males do sense the uncanniness of life, especially in the procreative act that makes new life possible. We do not need to be grave about what is ineffable, what we can't speak about. Perhaps the only thing to do is smile. Next, I recommend that we reconsider the fabled excesses of men. These cut both ways. Men have done a lot of harm, by the way, mostly to other men, but nearly always at the expense of real power over their own lives, as an American colleague, Warren Farrell, has pointed out for many years, beginning with a book he called The Myth of Male Power. Again, I repeat, I'm talking here about blokes, about most men, not the few who get the attention of the media and a certain mythology that has grown up out there. Lots and lots of men have done a great deal that has been put to good use. Take a few moments later on to think of the answer to the questions, how did you get here today? And what do you see when you look around you? Whether you think about automobiles, trains, aircraft, roads, and the technology that is required to make them function, or this building, its materials, the energy to operate this system, you'll nearly always be led back to the work of the man. And he had something to do with your mom in getting you here as well. If the men in our audience seem embarrassed at hearing this, understand that it is news to many of them, since as a culture in recent years we have neglected recalling such things. So I would recommend also that we pause at men's incredulity, their inability to believe these days that what they do well is mentioned at all. Do not mistake a dumbfounded response for a lack of comprehension in them, however, or a deep appreciation at having been recognized. Remember the boy with the snake in the box, and that most men may not need constant acknowledgement for what they do. But there has to be some, and at this time, a good deal more than they get, I would say. Finally, as I said this morning, we must mentor boys and young men. I believe that only men can mentor boys adequately. To learn to do this, we must revisit the notions of fatherhood and sonhood, as I made a start at doing this morning. By the way, I thought I had invented a new word, sonhood. So I thought, since my computer program spell checker underscored it and read. In fact, it's been around since the 17th century, but fell out of usage, curiously enough, at the end of the 19th century. Why this happened just when it did deserves the efforts of a good historian. We must restore sonhood a place not only in our vocabulary but also in our thinking about boys, fathers, and mentors in the context of the overall well-being of boys and men. Let me close by revisiting another observation from this morning. It's one of my pet ideas these days. It occurred to me in the wake of foregrounding boyhood when I began this project a dozen years ago. And that is boys' singular preference for the possible versus the actual. That is, what is taken for granted, the actual, what is taken for granted as inevitable and natural. As I see them, boys provide us with a model for the human that we might aspire to, an appreciation of possibility, pure possibility for its own sake. This allows us to adjust our horizon, shift our perspective, and with imaginative variation renew our taste for the novel and unexpected. Boys are avid phenomenologists in this. You may not be familiar with this term. Phenomenologists are those who like to let something show itself for what it is, not convinced that it is what we've been told it is. Well, I think we can learn from this perspective that I find to be very much a characteristic of boys. Boys and young men have not given up on doing this, since it seems to be deeply ingrained in them. Sadly, they are not being encouraged, however, to do it. And to that extent, freedom to pursue the possible is constrained, and as a culture we're the poorer for it. I'm convinced that this essential feature of boyhood must be honored and valued when I hear from my male students about their dreams and schemes. We must listen to boys, let boys say their experience and permit them voyage. They will be the ones to tell us about what most men can do well and how all of us might do things better, and perhaps even why men have fallen silent. They will revive and inspire us, and perhaps teach us something about how to be human. In this way, they will father us, as Thackeray observed. The boy is father to the man.